What's up, guys? Welcome back to another daily Bible reading snapshot. Today we're looking at Jeremiah 43, 44, and 45 here in the Old Testament. Then we're looking at Hebrews chapter 3 in the New Testament. So here in Jeremiah, we're going to see the last two chapters chronologically. So chapter 43 and 44 are continuing the narrative we just did. Chapter 45 is kind of a flashback. And then tomorrow, chapter 46 to the end of the book is going to go back in time again. So I think the furthest along in history that you really get is right here in chapter 44, with the exception of part of the last chapter in chapter 52. So that was kind of complicated, but here's why I say that. Chapter 43 continues this narrative. We see Johanan, who was leading this group, who was asking Jeremiah, hey, we'll do whatever God says. We'll stay in the land, we'll go, whatever God tells us to do, that's what we'll do next. But really, when he asked that, he wanted to hear a particular answer. He wanted his own presupposition. He wanted his own idea ahead of time to be proved correct by the prayer, but it wasn't. It was actually proved wrong. God says, no, stay in the land. Don't go to Egypt. And here's what happens. They accuse Jeremiah, and you say, you are telling a lie. The Lord our God did not send you to say, don't go down to Egypt and live there. So he says all these things, right? And is all this confusion, and they're accusing him, and it says they did not obey the voice of the Lord. They took all their forces, they went down to Israel, not Israel, they went down to Egypt, they're in Israel. They go down to Egypt, to the city of Tahpanhes, right there at the end of verse 7. So then it says the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah in Tahpanhes. So guess who goes down with him? Guess who's carried along with the whole group? Jeremiah, which is why we said at the beginning of the book, we think Jeremiah probably died in Egypt because there's no record of him coming back here. It's possible, but it doesn't seem like it. It seems like he died in Egypt in this city of Tahpanhes when the people of Israel go down there. What's the problem? He says, take these large stones, hide them in the mortar and the pavement that's at the entrance of Pharaoh's palace in Tahpanhes, in the sight of all the men of Judah. And he says, great, we just put those rocks in the ground. What was that for, God? And God says, God is going to spread over that the royal throne of King Nebuchadnezzar, which was the whole reason they went down to Egypt. If you're thinking about a map, right? If Israel's here, Egypt is down here, right? Babylon and Nebuchadnezzar are way off in the distance over here. Well, what's going on? They're trying to escape Nebuchadnezzar. That's the point. And God says, nope, you didn't listen to my word. You will not escape King Nebuchadnezzar. He's going to follow you. In fact, he is going to come and take over down here. Chapter 44 continues this idea. They're living in Tahpanhes, and they're having this conversation, and Jeremiah prophesies to them. God gives him the word of the Lord, and he says there's going to be desolation in the places you're living in right now. All that disaster that was going on in Judah, that's going to follow you. Why? Well, it says because you have gone down to Egypt and you have served their idols. So it wasn't enough for the people of Israel and Judah to worship idols in their land. When they go into this foreign land, what are they continuing to do? They're not repenting of their sin. They're not turning back to God wholeheartedly and saying, we want to serve God. They are worshiping all the idols of Egypt. Just think about how terrible that is. Why did the people of Israel go into exile? Why did they get taken out of the promised land? And it's so interesting, right? Sent back to Egypt. Where did they come out of historically? They came out of Egypt. They're supposed to be saved out of Egypt. Right now they're going back into it willfully. They're going back down to Egypt. And it says that they kept serving these false gods. Verse 10 says, they have not humbled themselves even to this day, nor have feared, nor have walked in my law and my statutes that I set before you and before your fathers. That's God speaking. Right? So it says they're not going to return. It's going to be terrible. And then the people of Judah have some snarky comments to make back to Jeremiah. It's very interesting. They say, as for the word that you have spoken, this is verse 16, in the name of the Lord, we will not listen to you. So they're blatant now. We will not listen to you. But we will do everything that we have vowed, making offerings to the Queen of Heaven and pouring out drink offerings to her, as we did, both we and our fathers and our kings and our officials in the city of Judah and in the streets of Jerusalem, which gives you a little insight onto how bad these people were. They were worshiping idols in Jerusalem, and it wasn't just them. It was the officials. It was the royals. It was the house of David. Then it says, for we had plenty of food and prospered and saw no disaster. But since we left off making offerings to the Queen of Heaven and pouring out drink offerings to her, we have lacked everything. So look what they're saying. They're saying this disaster didn't come to us by God. It came to us because we stopped worshiping the Queen of Heaven, which could have been one of the false gods. People have guesses about that. There's different false gods. But anyway, the point is these false gods that they worship, the Queen of Heaven, they stopped worshiping. And it's interesting that the women chime in verse 19, right? The women haven't been prominent speakers in this so far, but now they say, what we have done with the approval of our husbands, which again, it's hard to explain how bad this worship was, but it involved, let's just put it like this, husbands and wives not acting like husbands and wives and saying, well, our husbands gave us this approval. Even that was evil, that these husbands allowed their wives to partake in this and these wives wanted to partake in this. That was evil and gross and disgusting and terrible. And Jeremiah says, you know what? You're right. If you want to keep doing those things, keep doing those things because God has utterly rejected you. You're not going to be forgiven. Don't even try to repent because it's over for you. You have chosen your way. You're done. This disaster is going to come upon you. He says, if you promise to serve your idols, guess what? Fine, do it. God has rejected you. He says, but I have people who are mine. There are people, a remnant, a small group that are mine. And I know who those people are. And a lot of those people are the people that were taken into exile into Babylon. And it says a couple things here in verse 28. It says, those who escape the sword, who go to the land of Egypt and to the land of Judah, they will be few in number, and a remnant of Judah who came to the land of Egypt shall live and shall know whose word will stand, mine or theirs. If he's saying, I'm going to prove to these people who is telling the truth, whether your word or my word is true. Then it says, here's a sign for you, which whenever God gives a sign, that's the proof that what he's saying has been true. What's the proof that he gives? Here's the sign. He says, the Pharaoh Hopra, he will be killed. He will be taken over just like Zedekiah. Just like Zedekiah was removed from his throne by the king of Babylon, so also will Pharaoh. The person you're now trusting in, he's going to be removed too. What does this show? It just shows God's sovereignty over every nation. Nobody can mess up his plan. Now, chapter 45, we're going back in time now. That's why I said chapter 44 was the end of our narrative so far. We're going back in time. This is a word that God gave to Baruch, the guy who wrote down everything for Jeremiah. He said, he complained to God. He said, woe is me, for the Lord has added sorrow to my pain. I am weary with my groanings, and I find no rest. And the Lord said to him, what did you think you were getting into here? He basically says, this whole ministry that you're doing with Jeremiah is very hard. You seek great things for yourself, don't seek them anymore. For behold, I'm bringing disaster upon all flesh, declares the Lord. But I will give you your life as a prize of war and all the places to which you will go. And now you might be saying, why this weird flashback to Baruch? Well, what's happening here? God is fulfilling that promise in chapter 44. Because you might be wondering, well, what happened to Baruch? What happened to Jeremiah? Like, are they going to be saved? And God's saying, no. Make sure you remember, I made a promise to Baruch. He will be saved. So his life was saved. He wasn't killed in any of this disaster. So again, this just shows that God is so sovereign and so in control of all things. If we try to fight him, we're going to get in a lot of trouble ourselves. Now, Hebrews chapter 3 is what we're looking in the New Testament. Again, we're talking about how Jesus is better than anything else these Jews could go back to serving. If they want to go back to the temple and worship and think that probably they're believing some of the propaganda from the Pharisees and stuff that would say, well, Moses is greater. He's older. He has so much, all this writing. We need to listen to Moses, not Jesus, right? Which again, real Christians understand that if you're listening to Moses, you're listening to Jesus. And if you're listening to Jesus, you are in alignment with Moses. There's no contradiction there. But some of these people were claiming that. So the author of Hebrews says, make sure you know this. Jesus is the son over the house. Yeah, Moses, he was a part of the building for sure. But who gets more glory, the builder or the building? Well, obviously the builder gets more glory. Jesus is the builder. Jesus was involved in everything that went along with these Israelites coming out of the wilderness, out of Egypt, into the promised land. And then he says, make sure you're not like those people in the wilderness who harden their hearts. And there's one command that we're given here that's very important, chapter 12, 13, and 14. He says, take care, brothers, lest there be in any of you an evil, unbelieving heart, leading you to fall away from the living God. Basically says in your church, in your small group, there will be people who turn away from God. And the reason for that is they don't have a believing heart. They don't trust in Jesus. That makes sense. I mean, we see that all the time, right? People walk away from church because they didn't really trust in Jesus for salvation. They wanted something from God and they felt disappointed, or it wasn't cool anymore. They were there to be cool or whatever it is. They walk away. And he says, here's what you need to do. exhort one another every day as long as it's called today, that none of you may be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. That is the command for us. As we look at this and look at the seriousness of people walking away from God, we need to say, we need to exhort. That means encourage. Push one another on to godliness every single day, because the danger is so great to turn away and to harden our hearts towards God. And we don't want to do that. We don't want anyone in our small group or our church to do that. So take part in that encouragement today. Exhort one another every day, as long as it's called today. So thanks for reading. We'll see you back tomorrow for another daily Bible reading snapshot.